Hello. As promised, this is the second episode this week, continuing the conversation about Ayurveda. You may or may not have listened to the first episode this week, so feel free to go back and do that. I'm offering that second episode each week because it's what I often find myself wanting. I don't know if you've had this experience, but sometimes when I'm listening to interviews on podcasts, I want to know more. I want to be able to try the things out or to get a deeper understanding of them after the conversation. So sometimes I'll do a deep dive on someone's website, and sometimes I'll just end up following them on Instagram and forgetting about it altogether. So, what I wanted to give you here are the things that you can start to explore or to find ways to incorporate what we're talking about into your life for some real learning and some real investigation for yourself. And I'm hoping that you find that that is exactly what they do for you. I do hope that that second podcast each week gives you a little bit more of what you're looking for. And of course, they're free. My hope is that leaving this conversation today, everyone will feel a little more comfortable and a little more curious because there is so much for us to learn in this world. If Ayurveda is not familiar to you, know that by the end of this conversation, you'll have an understanding and a jumping off point to begin to learn more. Today, we're going to be hearing from Gretchen Mills, Doctor of Ayurveda. What I don't mention in the podcast is that she's actually one of my nearest and dearest. We basically met on a blind date. Back when my husband was just my roommate, he called me from work one day and told me that he had a friend in town for just the day and would I want to hang out with them. If you know me, you might think that this is something that I would jump at in a heartbeat. But quite honestly, I was like, why would I want to do that? But then he told me that we were from the same neck of the woods and that I would love her. And so I was intrigued. And 8 hours later, we were still walking the streets of Boston, so sad that our time together was going to end. And since then, we've shared some of the greatest laughs because she is truly hilarious. And we've shared some of the greatest losses and grief. We've gotten to watch each other grow in the work that we do and as mothers and people. And I love getting to see this work side of my friend, but I realize that, perhaps unlike for many of us in the work that we do, for Gretchen, this is life. This is how she lives, not just in work, but as a mother and a friend and for herself. And her devotion, her study, and her work really come through in this conversation. So I'm very excited for you to hear from her. The last note before we dive in, funny little story to share. As I was getting ready for this interview, I had done all the lovely things, meditation, garden time, was feeling so good. And then I accidentally flushed the key to the podcast equipment closet down the toilet. A quick and fruitless trip to Home Depot later, my worst fears were realized that I could not replace that key. And so with crowbar in hand, I disassembled my door and we made this happen. So as we sit down to chat, you'll hear me talk a little bit about the state of my morning. But, really, that is kind of like just another day around here. I definitely haven't mastered life yet. And at the same time, I don't expect really to ever master life. So, c'est la vie. I think Gretchen has a lot to offer in bringing the kind of balance I could use. And I'm sure some of you out there can as well. So, without further ado, this is In Our Skin, a podcast for those who are looking to feel better in their bodies, in their lives, and about themselves as they live it. Come here imperfectly and feel free to stay that way. We're here to begin to move away from striving to please others and to meet expectations that are not ours, to stop beating ourselves up to feel enough, and to learn how to accept that we are. And I am glad you are here. I'm Ashley McCann. Welcome. Hey. Hi. I was thinking of you as I was blowing through my morning and my Vata Pitta imbalance that ironically showed up after I had started my day meditating and writing and picking flowers in the garden. And then it was full steam ahead. And I'm like, I don't think this is an abnormal day.
It's like as a whole, everything is a lot right now. Instead of saying it's very busy, I like to say life
Oh,
is very abundant right now.
nice
And
spin.
but it seems that we're shifting from saying I have a doshic constitution of Vata Pitta to I have a Vata Pitta imbalance.
I
Wow.
love this. Start by just telling people what Ayurveda is and what it is that you do.
So I'd say first by just recognizing the root of the word Ayurveda, because it's a very foreign word. People are often intimidated by the word itself. How do you pronounce it? How do you spell it? And introduce people to this, I have to think about all of that. But Ayurveda can be broken down into two words, Ayur and Veda. And Ayur means life, and Veda means study or science. So ultimately, it's the study of life, it's the science of life. So it encompasses everything. It encompasses every single thing about ourselves, all layers of self, and every single thing that we're connected to. There's no right or wrong way to think about this. I'd say most people come to Ayurveda and or yoga when they need to fix something, when they need help, when they're reaching a roadblock. And I came to yoga before Ayurveda, which seems to be the case for most. And it was in a time that was, well, I should back it up. The first time I practiced yoga, I thought it was the most boring thing I'd ever done. And I learned Shavasana. So I will back it up to that.
And that is not necessarily uncommon, depending. And I think that is actually why we have such success in the United States with like the fun music power classes that keep moving because it's like, you got to keep the people engaged, you know? It's hard. And you
Yeah.
know what? And I will validate this, people, that it's not because there's something wrong with us, because when something gives us that space before we're ready for space, we're flooded with everything that is hard in our minds.
Yes.
And it can get really uncomfortable fast. So,
And also, our mind wants excitement. So when you
yeah.
bring something to it that doesn't seem exciting, it's like, what are we doing? I could be
Yeah.
doing
Why
something so much
be
better right
here?
now. Yeah. And that answer comes through your own experience because anybody could tell you what the answer to that is, and you won't believe it until you experience it. So, anyway, as a volleyball player, I was very pitta, very fiery, and very vata. And I wanted adventure and activity, and yoga was very boring. So I stopped doing it for several years. And then I found a yoga class in the Florida Keys that was outside on the ocean. And I thought, this I can do. This is beautiful. And it opened me up to it. I started to search out yoga, and I was, like most, very attracted to vinyasa. I wanted to do vinyasa morning and night. I was obsessive over doing vinyasa and made me feel so good. I loved it. But it only went so far, and I didn't realize it was serving me in all of the ways that I needed at the time. But I, at the time, knew nothing about Ayurveda or my dosha, and I was having many heart palpitations and being rushed to the hospital, thinking I was going to die every time. And I eventually had heart surgery, and heart surgery embedded a deep anxiety, a deep imbalance within me. And I had anxiety attacks that were beyond, I mean, they would wake me up in the middle of the night and I would be full blown in one. I didn't even have the opportunity to recognize I was having it and calming it down. It just happened. And it happened night after night after night. And it took over my entire life. I developed a very serious anxiety disorder. It really took me over. And I was in the middle of an anxiety attack one night, legs up the wall, doing anything I could think of to get myself through it so I don't die, because I literally felt like it would take my life every time. And I had to learn to breathe. I had to learn to find breath, and I had to learn to understand how much my mind was feeding it. So, very difficult, but I focused on breath and I focused on my mind. And it became necessary for me to do this every single day. And it got to the point where I would start to really look forward to my yoga practice because I knew it was the thing I needed, that wisdom. I knew my body was saying, tomorrow morning, keep this going, keep this going.
Yeah.
And I was working at a biological field station at the time, and I started to inspire others to come. They would say, I see you practicing each morning. Can I join you? And I'd say, of course. And then I realized how much I loved sharing it because I was so passionate about the medicine that it was providing to me. I started to teach yoga. But when I started to teach yoga, I didn't feel content with the knowledge base that I had, partly because I needed to keep practicing, and partly because I hadn't yet found a teacher that was truly teaching me the magic of yoga, the true foundation of yoga. And I wanted to know, have been the teachers in the history of yoga that has had the biggest impact and why. So I studied that and I went to India and I studied tons of books and asked lots of questions to a lot of different people. And I really settled on Krishnacharya, who's considered the father of yoga. And I looked at what did he teach and why did he teach it? And he was an astrologer, a Vedic astrologist. He was also an Ayurvedic doctor and a yoga teacher, but especially a yoga teacher of one student at a time. So that's really what turned me on to Ayurveda. I thought he must be offering a much wholer approach to health. I mean, he was healing disease. He wasn't just teaching yoga to a class for the betterment of our, flexibility and strength. He was curing disease. So to me, Ayurveda was a big piece of that. And how do yoga and Ayurveda come together to offer that prescription in a sense?
That's wild. It is crazy that I have known you for so long and known so much of your story, and I did not know what really led to not just you finding yoga, but a change in the way that you approached it and what led you to Ayurveda. It's wild. And I think it's so meaningful because, and I could say this, there are people who are listening to you and you are, like our Ayurvedic expert. But understanding how, like, a normal person with a normal struggle finds their way here is really helpful. Like, it's just helpful to hear, like, "Wait, you had debilitating anxiety? Oh, so you haven't always just been, oiling your body at night and feeling good, right? Like, you do these things because you need these things."
Yeah.
Not because you're just so blessed that it's easy to, fit in your day and you're so grounded that it's natural, but literally because you need it to manage that balance that allows you to be who you are and show up in the world the way you do.
That is such a beautiful point that you're making because I really do think often we think that, oh, yoga isn't for me. I'll do yoga once I have the right clothes, or I'll do yoga once I can touch my toes.
Yep.
Yoga really helps us to understand steadiness and the subtle body and the inner communications. And some of its intentions are to steady the body and mind.
Yeah.
I do feel that yoga is this beautiful tool that helps us to understand how we navigate life, which ultimately comes under this big Ayurveda umbrella. Oftentimes people think Ayurveda is the sister science of yoga. And we could talk about that philosophy and it would be beautiful. I think of them both as roadmaps to peace and happiness.
Yeah.
I have found though through my studies that I think about Ayurveda as like the big umbrella because it is the study of life. And I think yoga is a beautiful tool under that umbrella. Yes.
Ayurveda is, I think of it as medicine and like nourishing, not just our physical body, but it's like very soul nourishing as well.
Yeah. I think medicine is such a perfect word because we learn in Ayurveda to be our own doctors and our own patients and our own teachers and our own students. Ayurveda is the science that teaches us that we are all unique, that we each have a specific makeup. And you'll hear the word dosha a lot, especially when you're first learning Ayurveda, learning what your doshic makeup is, your constitution is. And that's based on the proportion of elements in our body or the proportion of elements. When we think body, we often just think physical body, but proportion of elements that makes up everything who we are and everything else. The elements start with space, and then we move evolutionarily to air, and then fire, and then water, and then earth,
So the literal elements.
the literal elements. Yeah. And the doshas are categorized into three different areas: vata, which are the elements of space and air; pitta, which are the elements of fire and water; and kapha are the elements of water and earth. And
Yeah.
so you can start to understand that if somebody had a lot more of the earth element in comparison to the space element, they would just move through life very differently. They would digest food differently. They would have different sleeping patterns. They would have different behaviors. They would speak differently. They would think differently. They would react differently. So we learned to look at Ayurveda not only from our physical makeup, but also every single thing that we do in life can be
Information.
It can be information about how we are, who we are, and how we can support our health best.
Yeah.
Ayurveda is all about studying opposing energies, as is yoga. That's what hatha really stands for. And so if you're going through your morning with busy, 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 move, 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 stress, 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 and add stimulants to it, that is a lot of movement. So Ayurveda would say we need to give ourselves the opposing qualities, which are going to be slow down, become more mindful, ground. And that can be different for everybody. Let's say, for instance, your dosha is pitta vata. Well, we would do our best to maintain that combination within you, where pitta is your strongest dosha, because that's where your nature lies. It's probably easy for your pitta to go out of balance, because when we have a lot of pitta, we have a lot of vata. Our tendencies are to go overboard in
Yeah.
both of those areas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
really do thrive in some kapha.
Yeah. Because it creates balance. It creates balance. That's the biggest thing. No, a lot of people think we should have perfect balance in pitta, vata, kapha, because then we're perfectly proportioned all the way around.
Yeah.
But actually, we are our strongest and our most healthy when we are in our natural constitution. But what happens over the years from experience and learning and growing is that we learn we have a lot of vata. That means I need to bring in more kaphic practices because they ground me. Sometimes it's just connecting your hands to the lower portion of your body. Sometimes it's lengthening the exhalation. Sometimes it's eating a warm soup that has a very grounding quality to it, or literally root vegetables that will root your system. So I have a lot of kapha in my day and in my rituals, and it's because they are a beautiful balance to all the vata that naturally resides within us.
It makes so much sense. And yet we might not be slowing down enough to actually consider it and apply it. So then when we look at, like, when I start to do the runaround, right? And it all changes. I immediately think of both vata and pitta. So what are some examples for people to
Yeah.
understand those?
So we'll start on vata because that is the first dosha. It's also the one that goes unbalanced most easily because it is movement within us. Vata is movement. So we have to have vata, but it's important to have healthy vata, healthy movement. So some vata examples would be, when you think about movement, it would be our circulatory system. It would be our heartbeat. Vata is space and air. So, as you mentioned earlier, you can spend a lifetime studying Ayurveda and you will continue to learn and just become more and more informed. And it's so empowering. But at the end of the day, it's also very logical and simple. So, you could think, okay, Vata, elements of space and air, what are those qualities? They're very just free flowing, you're not really living in a box mentally. You really love traveling and expanding. You love trying new things. You want to just keep flowing. You don't really want to be stale or static. You want to just keep learning. And Vatas typically have a lot of joy within them, unless there's too much Vata. Then, what happens when our energy is super high and chaotic? It
Right.
becomes anxiety. It becomes emotionally and mentally difficult to control.
There we go.
So it's important to recognize when you just have too much stimulation, too much movement in your lives. There's no rules in Ayurveda whatsoever, but it is just coming back to listening again and again. We actually know almost always what we need for ourselves. It's just listening. And Ayurveda is studying the physical health, the mental health, as well as the emotional health. And I think the mental one ends up being the center, really, because if we don't give our minds space, if we don't let our minds settle, then this is going to block our ability to metabolize food. It's going to disrupt our nervous system, and same with our emotional system. If we don't overcome our sorrows, they'll become embedded. And
Yeah.
with our physical system, if we don't digest in a way that really supports our unique digestive system, then our metabolism will be affected by it. Our immune system will be affected by it.
When we are in that heightened anxiety, the too much and struggling to control and ground, we're in our stress response and our digestion is offline. I was teaching to a group about the nervous system this weekend, and in a room of 75 people, the number of people who raised their hand for some of these symptoms. I mean, amongst the people that I work with, I would say at least 90% around digestion. And that's, people who are talking to me about it.
Yeah.
And so this all really registers.
Yep. Most people can connect to Ayurveda through our nervous system. Most people can understand it through our nervous system and digestion. And then Pitta is an interesting energy as well, because as you mentioned earlier, it is a go go energy. Pitta is digestion, but it's digesting all things. It's not just food, everything that we take in through our senses, everything that we take in through our mind and our thoughts. We're processing that and digesting that all the time. But it's also transformation. Pitta is transformation. So oftentimes Pitta, as I mentioned earlier, it's fire and water, fire. It's fiery energy. Pittas get stuff done. And that can become obsessive. That can become addicting
Yeah.
because you see a lot of transformation in your life. You get things done. That's a good feeling. But that too can become too much, too fiery, too hot, which will affect the nervous system, will affect the emotional system. Think about fire emotions, our anger and frustration,
Yeah.
hot,
Resentment.
resentment.
But yeah, I was just talking to someone about burnout, and while burnout isn't just about what is happening here in the present day, and so much of it is built up from our past experiences, that's a really good example of what might burn us out on a Monday or a Wednesday or a Friday from what's happening this week. It's that kind of build up,
Yeah,
doing it all, and then finding ourselves without maybe the reserves and the balance to maintain it.
exactly. And Ayurveda really focuses on connecting our internal with our external. So, understanding also the seasons and the phases of life and what doshas are significant. Yeah. So, in the middle stages of our lives, we have a lot of pitta energy. It's when we're perhaps balancing businesses and raising kids and doing. There's a lot going on. But in our third stage or final stage of life, it's more vata. And we see this a lot. We see our skin change. We become more dry. It's more windy. It's more airy. We are what yoga and Ayurveda called moving into forest dwelling phase.
I really like that. If anyone on Instagram has had their feed this to them, like me, it's like cottage in the woods, like yearning for it. It sounds lovely.
Vata needs nurturing. Vata needs nurturing. And what is more nurturing than a forest? Um, and then the first stage of life is kapha, and kapha is water and earth. We need kapha, which is routine and grounding and slowing and loving and creating structure. That, as you can imagine, would be fantastic for the other doshas. But if we tend to really move in the direction of kapha and we don't balance that out, we can become very lethargic, very what yoga calls tamasic, heavy, dull. We
Mhm.
might experience weight gain or water retention. So that too, but
Yeah.
comes the balance.
Yeah. I think that one of the things to say, because this will come up when people start to look at where what they are, we'll start to think that one's better. And there is no better or worse, and we actually need all.
Yeah, and we all have all. We're all made of all of the elements, and we need them for the structure of our body. We need them for the functioning of the body. We need all five elements for every physiological process in the body. So the best thing we can do is step out of the way because our bodies have the wisdom, the intelligence to heal in every single moment. The best thing we can do is step out of the way and listen and respond most intelligently to support the healing process. And we really learn to listen. We develop that skill of listening. And that also comes with yoga, which is why the two of them will just overlap continually. We'll keep coming back to how they come into this partnership that ultimately is the most beautiful partnership we'll ever experience.
Listening is something that we really have lost our ability to do in life. Being able to feel into our bodies and understand our bodies is something that we're really taught out of,
Yeah.
often by very well intending, loving human beings in our life or by messages that we're receiving in the world around us that could come from people in places that think that they do have our best interest in mind. But we are taught to like look outward and do what we are told when it comes to taking care of ourselves and our bodies. And then we can kind of develop this disconnection, maybe even fear of trusting ourselves in what we feel because we haven't been taught to strengthen it. It gets so buried deep down, and it's a huge part of the work that I do with people in healing, whether it's through practices of yoga or EMDR, and you're obviously doing it through Ayurveda. So there is this interesting thing that all this research is showing that very close to 90% of women across the age span until 75, where we see it go down to only 80%, which is still extremely high, experience body dissatisfaction. And what I know from the work that I've done, and I know that you can relate to from the work that you've done, is that a lot of us are disconnected in a way that it almost inhibits and disables our ability to do that because there isn't enough connection to have guidance because the relationship with our body is so strained. And often our body is seen as this separate entity that kind of holds all of the blame for our pain and our trauma, or because our pain and our trauma and hard experiences happened in our body, we might be inclined to not want to be in our body because it doesn't feel safe, right?
Yeah. Depending on the doshic type, the constitution, there will be different tendencies around this topic. So everybody is different. But I will say that this dissatisfaction with the body often starts when we're young,
Hmm.
when you almost feel like a ping pong when you're in your teenage years and 20s, and you don't have a lot of life experience or your own understanding of what makes you who you are. You've learned from your parents, you've learned from your teachers. You really don't know yet.
And
It,
you're trying so hard to figure it out.
yeah,
Like, you just want to figure it out. I always say,
yeah,
like, these are the phases of life where we look around and we're like, that person looks like they've got it together. I'll wear the same shoes as them. Like, we're
right.
just like, maybe if I do what they do, I'll feel the way I imagine they feel.
Exactly. And I think it's not only when you're young, all ages experience this
Mhm.
dissatisfaction with the body, and it comes from a lot of different places, but I think it originates earlier in life often, and then these mental patterns become stronger and stronger. And I think adding on to what you were just talking about, it starts with school. Everybody stand in the same line, everybody position the same way. We're taught to all do the same thing in our thoughts in almost everything that we do. We relate them to so many life experiences.
Well, and what I'll say is that this is samskaras. And, when you look at the definition of samskara, or there's many, I'm sure, but what has always stuck with me is that our samskaras are these mental impressions of ourselves in the world in a way, and they become the lens through which we see our life. So if I have this imprint of a belief about my body that develops when I'm young, the thing with some scars is that we stop seeing them. They're subconscious. They're just simply what we believe to be of ourself and the way we see things. So we don't question them. It becomes less of a discourse with ourselves. Is this true of me? At a certain point, it becomes, this is who I am, and we stop questioning it. And so we find more evidence of it because when we go somewhere, it goes with us. And if it feels like, my body is a problem and I have that, and it's a lens through which I'm seeing my experiences, it's more likely that I'm going to continue to see it and
Yeah.
find more evidence of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if it's a dissatisfaction of the body in the way that we've dove into thus far, it is about overcoming those mental patterns and replacing them with new. So something that's just sounds so simple, but it can be really helpful, I think, is you can think of those mental patterns as weight. And I think any of us who have experienced those, they feel so like they have so much weight. They take over, and so, okay, what's the opposing quality of weight? Space, the element of space. Go all the way back to the very start of the elements, space. And if you meditate on space and buoyancy, it's really helpful to break those cycles. That's one way. Our mind and body are not separate. They are the same. Our mind, our body, all the layers of self are all part of what make us up who we are, but we can just shift the lens. So if you experience yourself in a new way, in a sense, you're separating from something else. You're separating from a mental pattern that's been created that's making you feel that you have this identity
Yeah.
when really it's just a mental pattern.
We are separating from what we believe is our identity that is actually just a mental pattern.
It's just a mental pattern that we know so well at this point, and we struggle with it because it exists within our experience, but it's not who we are at all. And it has more weight the more that we feed it, the more that we allow it to show up.
I love this because you also said a different way of experiencing ourselves. And I think that there's a lot of doubt that we can experience ourselves and our relationship with to ourselves and being in our body and being in these lives in a different way when we're so used to it maybe being bogged down by either the weight of depression and the lethargy or the anxiety or the compulsion. Because when we live in those ways, there will be a part of us that believes that that is the way and that the unknown is a bit of a threat. I think that's why yoga and all of the practices that are within it and all of these Ayurvedic practices that I'm sure you're going to tell us more about matter so much. Because when we try something new, and I don't care, it could be pottery, but like when we do something different to experience ourselves differently, it's like we don't know what is possible until we do that.
Mhm.
And and I think that that's a really beautiful reminder that like if you are feeling like nothing's changing and you are doubting the possibility of feeling different, that it maybe there's something you haven't tried that can allow you that space to detach from that identity, to experience yourself differently.
That is the beauty of life. I mean, there's infinite things to try. There's infinite ways to learn more about ourselves. And it's easy to have tunnel vision and to think that you know yourself. But it's if we can find joy in that process of recognizing that everything is constantly changing and that every moment is different, every day is different, it's exciting. And we don't have to hold on to anything.
Yeah.
So that's one way that I think we can become dissatisfied with our body is just over time we develop these patterns that require a lot of effort and awareness to move through, but completely possible. I think the most powerful statement in my life has been, this too shall pass. But then also, we can have dissatisfaction with our body because we know that our body needs different. And so we can have this, it's called prajnaparata, which is a crime against our wisdom, which is
Ooh. Well, but as you say that, it feels harsh. But how many times have we done something that we're like, I know that this is not the best choice for me?
yeah.
Crimes against wisdom. I don't like that very much.
Ayurveda teaches that the etiology of disease, there are three things that significantly play a role in developing disease. And one of them is prajnaparata. And it's exactly what you just said. You know something is not right, but you're going to do it anyway. And it could be something simple like, I drink coffee every day. It
Listen,
brings me joy, but I
take it.
know my body doesn't love this every day. Or it could be you're driving too fast down the road and you know inside this is unsafe. It's not what I should be doing, but I'm going to do it anyway. Or bigger, we stay in unhealthy relationships. There are lots of things. Our body is constantly communicating what it needs and what it doesn't need. And it's a process of learning how to listen to that. Um, but I think sometimes our dissatisfaction will come from needing to make change, and only we can make change. So it's beautiful and empowering. We have so much, my daughter chews her nails and she's always saying, I want long nails. And I'm like, isn't it amazing that all you have to do is stop chewing your nail and your nail will grow? That easy. Not everything is that easy, but it's just that only we have the ability to make those changes. So sometimes it just takes a little push or a talk with yourself that says, okay, what are my intentions? What am I manifesting? Okay, what's the roadmap? And then developing rituals around that intention. Ritual is so beautiful. They're not rules or restrictions. They're beautiful practices that you come back to daily that help you overcome and replace the patterns that weren't serving you.
Yes, yes, yes. And I feel like Ayurveda, so for anyone who's been like, "Well, how do you start? How do you do this?" Ayurveda is chock full of great ideas for this. I've tried a lot of them. I've forced myself into some that were probably, like, too much at once, and so I will just say I've done it all the ways, and I haven't done everything. If you, have seen anything that Gretchen and I have offered in our retreat last year, and we have a yoga training coming up, you'll get a lot of these, and you'll get a lot of hand-holding and support around practices. What are some of your favorite rituals right now?
Yeah, some of my favorite rituals, I'd say my number one is oiling, daily oiling. This ritual just has infinite benefits, but one is grounding. I do have a lot of vata in my constitution. And even if I didn't have a lot of vata, life, as we mentioned, is very abundant for all of us. So you start the day off in the time of day where there's the least light pollution, there's the least sound pollution. You can really tune into yourself. You can focus on you. And then oiling is this very deep practice. Oil penetrates. It's much stronger than using like a lotion, say. It penetrates through the lipid system and it supports the digestive system. It's very detoxifying. It's very grounding. I think that has become really important in my daily life.
Mhm.
And then I would say cooking. We've become such a fast moving society and we're all about quick and
Yeah.
easy, convenient. But cooking is so important for cleansing our senses. And this is something that we don't learn in our culture. Yoga and Ayurveda are both very, in fact, that's another part of the etiology of disease, understanding how we develop disease is our senses, they absolutely have to be functioning in a healthy way, or else we will suffer mentally and physically. So cleansing of the senses and cooking is such a beautiful way to do that. Breathing in the spices that you're freshly grinding and cooking it with oils and being part of that process opens everything up and connects us, going back to, connecting to our body. It helps us connect to food in a way that is so nurturing rather than stressful. To me, cooking, it cleanses and heals so powerfully. And as we all know, sharing a meal with people just feels like medicine in itself. But there's a lot of reasons why there's so many layers to that.
When you're talking about cleansing the senses, like, if we pull out just that, I don't think there's a single person who will listen to this who hasn't had this feeling of, like, overwhelm from the stimulation of the world around them at some point. It's like we're taking in so much through our phones and before we realize it, or we're, in traffic and, it might even just be in your house and there's a lot going on. If we're looking at, like, that sounds like something I need. Cooking is one way. What else can we do to cleanse our senses? I like
Well,
this.
I immediately go to meditation or thinking about the mind as it's often considered the maha sense or the grand sense the mind is. And there's a concept that we'll explore more in the yoga teacher training if you're joining. But just to give a little summary, kala, Kela, is time, but it's not time the way that we think about it in our culture. It's when we're thinking of the mind and time, we need to give our mind time and space. It's why we all crave going to the Himalayas or we all crave going on a silent retreat, even though it sounds so hard. We feel like we need it. And it's because our mind needs time.
Yeah.
And Kala is also about everything is process. So again, it's not time, like we have 1 hour to do this. It's about recognizing that everything takes time and is a process and it's all part of evolution or the evolution of something developing. So I'd say first and foremost, giving your mind time is a way to really soothe the senses. And then physical things like wake up in the morning, we have a lot of kapha in our eyes in the morning. So kapha, as I mentioned earlier, is earth and water. So any of the fluid in our body, like the fluid in our eyes, the fluid around our heart and our lungs, the
Our
fluid in our
throat and our
joints.
nose, right?
Exactly. And we can have too much cough in our throat and our nose if we're experiencing a cold or allergies or a sinus infection. But in the morning, we have sometimes like foggy eyes or crusty eyes. that type of thing. So just rinsing your eyes with cold water repeatedly. And water has so many healing effects anyway. But opening up your senses in your eyes and just working with them like that, or bumblebee breath is a really wonderful one to
Love
clean
that one.
the senses. Yeah, where you just inhale through your nose and exhale a long hum.
Hmm. If you go on the website, you'll see that there is a whole nervous system reset, and it's one of the practices that is guided in there. So if you're curious about it, take a look. I love this. And I think that, just expanding on this, I think everyone, like, just take a moment. Like, what is something that to you would be cleansing your senses? Creating something that's neutralizing, like smelling something that
Mhm,
actually, like Gresh was saying with the spices, and like using your senses intentionally or less, right?
mhm.
Giving yourself something that is soothing or neutralizing, or taking something away, even if it's just a minute or two or a few minutes a day, to be intentional about it. There is so much power in just actually naming, like, I am doing this for this purpose. It has an exponential effect on us. There's research that shows this. And so just be intentional about whatever you can do, the little things. Maybe you
And
can't cook every meal. These are Gretchen's rituals, but maybe the next time you do cook a meal, you're thinking about the fact that you're cooking a meal while you're cooking a meal, and it has a different impact. Do you have any other rituals, Gretch?
well, even just ritual in itself,
Mhm.
creating like what you're saying, creating ceremony around something will allow you to be more mindful, which is very cleansing for the senses.
Yeah.
But Ayurveda is based a lot on rituals. So yoga is a beautiful ritual to bring in every day, probably for the movement of your body and your joints and your lymphatic system and circulatory system, but also the breathing, really supporting the respiratory system and our energetic and physical bodies. The yoga is really wonderful. But what's really powerful is when you combine yoga and Ayurveda. Because if you think about it, yoga is universal, which is wonderful. It's for all humans. It's for the benefit of all humans and everything that we come in contact with or that we are connected to. But I find in our culture, we kind of just choose the one that either our neighbor goes to, or, we go to the class that our best friend goes to, or it's the one in our neighborhood and we experience benefit from it, I'm sure. But sometimes yoga can also be a demand in our body or in our lives because we're doing that same thing that we do everywhere else in our life. We push ourselves too much and we create too much unnecessary movement. And so when
Yeah.
we understand our dosha or our constitution, even the type of yoga that we choose can become way more powerful than if we just went to the local power yoga class, for instance.
Yep. Knowing where we're
And
going and choosing for that reason. And it's interesting because, yoga in our culture is very different than yoga in tradition. Yoga in tradition wasn't about going and sweating and having to move at an intense pace. And luckily, we are now in most studios seeing other classes for yin and restorative and sound baths and meditation and chanting practices, but not everywhere. And so
mm,
often you don't have the choice to do the thing that might be balancing, you know,
right.
when I'm coming off of a busy morning or a full day and all the time is blocked and I'm going into a hot power class, that's going to further an imbalance for me. If I'm coming off of that same day and I'm going into a yin class, that's highly likely to have a different benefit and actually leave me feeling more like myself when I walk out and more able to do whatever is next. But we aren't really taught that. And we're kind of shown, maybe not kind of, we've been shown for many years in our culture that yoga is about attainment and what it looks like on the outside. And it's missing the mark of what we are talking about when it comes to yoga. And, our teacher training that's coming up is really something I've been thinking a lot about, like how to communicate it to people. What is different about it? Because it's okay to want to teach classes, but traditional yoga wasn't taught to people so they could go teach classes,
Mhm.
and power yoga. And that can be so balancing when you need it, when you're feeling heavy with that kapha energy, or you're feeling low and slow and you need to go and move and do that. That is brilliant and balancing. what Gretchen and I want to offer you all is an opportunity just to see, like, how can I actually apply more than just what that looks like in my day to day to feel better and feel different in my life, and to actually deepen that connection and understanding of myself, and to connect to that intuition that feels like it's often so buried for us. And the practices that we'll offer you will get you closer to that. And you can still enjoy your other class. And you might find that you're happy to go into a class that before you wouldn't have. And I hope that that speaks to a lot of people and gives you permission to consider maybe doing it differently than what you've been doing, because maybe it wasn't shown to you or suggested, or it wasn't an option you knew you had, that there's another way.
Yeah. I think with the teacher training, we think, oh, we're going to go learn how to teach yoga. And that is a component of it. Ashley and I will focus even more on teaching a set of tools or practices that can be most personalized for the individual. Because if you learn it within yourself, then you'll be able to teach it from such an authentic place and it'll come out of you in a different way and it'll be more powerful the way that it comes out. So the teacher training will be really focused on coming to that place of balance and sattva, which is clarity. And it's that sattva is like crisp, clear, awakened, so that you are able to really offer this information in a way that helps other people connect to that place where they're their own doctor, they're their own patient, they're their own teacher and their own student, back to that. And so I think the training will be a deep exploration of self as well as these ancient teachings that are so important in our modern world.
And what I think is so great about that too is, like we were talking about before, like for someone who's like, I don't really feel like this is going to change for me the way that I feel in my body, the way life is going. A lot of things might feel out of our control in our life, and many of those things might factually be out of our control. But what I think this does is it highlights where we have choice and where we have resources that maybe you don't have yet and that you can develop, so that you can feel like you have more choice and power and control over how you feel in your life, even when some things are outside of your control. Gretch, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. It was so fun, such an honor.
I can't wait to be in real life with you. For those of you who are interested in learning more about Gretchen and Ayurveda, about our upcoming yoga teacher training, don't hesitate to go to the show notes to reach out. You can shoot me a DM, an email. We'll be there soon.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Have a good day.
Bye.
As always, thank you so much for listening along. You'll find all of the links you need to connect to Gretchen, to our training, and to all of the other offerings, including the Nervous System Reset, which you can get 40% off of from now until November 10th. Until next week, take care. This has been another episode of In Our Skin. Thank you for listening.